Hi everyone, welcome to part 2. Okay, the next section is entitled The Aggressively Posted Rook as an Endgame Advantage. Nimzowitsch begins it by saying that in the middle game, little advantage can be claimed in having a more actively posted rook. However, in the endgame, this kind of advantage can be decisive. If we look at the three setups on the board here, taking them as isolated cases, in each instance, white has the more active and aggressive rook. So we can see here, this rook is attacking the pawn, this rook's tied to defending it. The same applies here, and the same applies here. And you know, in all three cases, the white rook is a hell of a lot more active than the black rook. So yeah, for example, if we look at this pair on the queen side, if both players also had pawns over here on the king side, ignoring these pieces that are here now, the position of the white rook can be transformed into the basis for some action there, as this is emphasized further, and this is emphasized further in direct proportion to how far the queenside pawn is advanced. You know, obviously, if the pawn was on a7 instead, it's a lot stronger. So yeah, okay, let's just say, for example, here, yeah, even if it's only just one square further up, in this position, white can play h4, followed up with h5, and at the appropriate moment, h takes g6, and you know, then the white rook is attacking this weak g6 pawn. Of course, black's not going to take here, or this pawn falls, and this pawn becomes very weak. So yeah, after h takes g6, h takes g6, the rook is attacking the pawn, the king can come up here, and then black's in trouble. And you know, the entire justification for this attacking idea with h4, h5 is the fact that the white rook is far more actively posted than the black rook, and the latter has greatly reduced flexibility with regard to defending the king side as a result. This can be formulated as follows. The weakness of the defending rook is based on the lack of flexibility that stops it getting to the other flank. Also important to consider here is the fact that the white king has far greater freedom to maneuver. Usually he would have to be careful, or at least suffer restriction due to the enemy rook. For example, in this position, white could also bring his king over to b6 and attack a6 in conjunction with the rook, brought around a different way, and then the rook is free to go anywhere over the board. He can go to the 8th rank and so on. And you know, after that, the game's just going to be winning. And in master level games, the players will undertake huge maneuvers simply to achieve such a position as this, with an active rook against a passive one, fully aware of the advantages that it can produce. Okay, so here's another example. It's black to move, and his pawn here is attacked on a5. So what would you play here? Stop the video if you want to give it some thought. Rook b2 is Nimzowicz's instructive recommendation. Black turns down the passive option of rook a7, which Nimzowitsch felt would probably lose. The reason black does this is to keep his rook active, and to keep the white king penned in on the first rank for at least a few moves. As is almost always the case, positional factors are far more important than material ones. Nimzowitsch summed up such situations as follows. When faced with the choice of protecting a pawn with a rook, which would subsequently be condemned to a very passive role, or sacrificing the pawn at once in order to ensure your rook remains active, you should always opt for the latter option. Naturally, this must be done with caution. In many cases, it will be a bad decision, but more often than not, it is the correct way to play. Next, Nimzowitsch includes the rule of Tarrasch regarding rook placement when passed pawns are involved. Namely, the rook always belongs behind the passed pawn, whether it is our passed pawn or our opponent's, i.e. we should always support the advance of our pawn with our rook. Thus, in this position, white should play rook a3. And the rook, in Nimzowicz's words, breathes its own life into the pawn. However, had it been black to play, he would not play rook a8 instead, simply losing to rook a3, but he would play rook d2 check, and after the king moves, rook a2, and get behind the pawn. And this exerts greater pressure than if it was attacking it from the front, and it's harder to defend with the white rook. And from a2, the rook can also swing over to attack g3, and at the correct moment when the king's not there, and interfere with any ideas white might have about bringing his king into the game. Or even if he does, for example, get his king to a6, black can play rook b2 and trap the king in this rank on the this file on the board. And all of these options are denied if black plays rook a8 instead. So always put your rooks behind your passed pawns. Okay, Nimzowitsch then illustrates how it is not only the case with rooks, but also minor pieces that the difference in value between an attacking and a defensive piece is made clear. The weakness in the knight as a protective piece is that any move it makes abandons the square it was protecting, which can often lead to zugzwang in the endgame, which is the case if it's black to move now. If the knight moves, then b6 drops, and any king move allows the white king to enter into the black position decisively. If it's white to move, he's not in zugzwang because he's able to make threats. For example, with king d5, threatens knight e5, attacking g6, and knight c6 check and so on, and it's just a completely winning endgame. Or he can play knight e3, and black is again in zugzwang. Now if the knight moves, then knight d5 check is going to pick up b6, and if the king moves, black loses the opposition as before, which of course loses the game here. Even if all the pieces are dropped down a rank, white still wins with the same ideas. When it's a bishop that's doing the protecting, it's often not able to be as quick as its attacking counterpart. Take a look at this position. White, of course, wants to queen his pawn, but the bishop on h2 has other ideas about that, and will simply sacrifice itself and force the draw if white queens now. So what's the correct way to proceed? It's a very instructive example. If you want to try and figure it out, then stop the video now. White's strongest plan is to play bishop on h4 here to f2, a7 and b8, after which he can neutralize this bishop on h2 and queen his pawn. However, black can prevent this by playing king a6 at the right moment, preventing bishop a7. So what does white do about that? There's a nice little trick. Here's how it goes. King b5 in order to come to a6. Sorry, actually, this is the starting position. So bishop h4 is first. And now king b5 in order to come to a6. So bishop f2, king a6, and now if bishop h4, with the idea, excuse me, of coming to c7, black can safely bring his king to c6 to prevent that. So now comes the key move. Again, if you want to try and spot it, then stop the video now. Bishop c5 is the answer. This is because it forces the black bishop to move. If the king moves instead, then bishop a7 wins. and the bishop has to stay on this queening diagonal. So bishop g3, and now white can threaten to bring the bishop to c7 via e7, again with the idea of neutralizing the bishop. So bishop e7, and black must defend c7 with his king now, or he loses quickly. King b5 avoids the check, but the positions are the same anyway. King b6, bishop d8 check, king c6, and only now comes the killer, bishop h4. And black no longer has the time to employ the same maneuver of getting his king to a6. Of course, he cannot take the bishop or the pawn queens, and it makes no difference where black puts the bishop on the diagonal. Let's say bishop h2, so now bishop f2, and the bishop makes it to a7 with a win. For example, bishop f4, bishop a7, bishop h2, bishop b8, bishop g1, for example, bishop f4, bishop a7, bishop e3, and the pawn is queening. So it's a very nice line. Okay, that's the end of part 2.